We're at the British Library. We found the Rational Female, and we're just going to have a quick conversation with her. First I'll start by saying, so I've seen a few videos, not a lot, of you speaking to a guy named Shisan. Have you heard of him? I think he goes by the name of something of a like Smile to Jannah. I think this is his name. Yeah. So I was wondering, what is your view on the Islamic faith?
I think there's a lot of really good things about Islam. I think there's some things about it that are quite negative, but I think that the way Islam is probably supposed to be, it's probably supposed to be quite positive. What does the word Islam mean? It means a love and submission to the will of God, and I don't think that's a negative thing at all. And I actually think that real Islam in its genuinely good form is actually quite a positive thing. And I would say the same goes for all of the religions, really. I think all of the religions have something positive to offer the world when they're used in a positive way.
Do you think, like, for example, texts that support sort of jihadism, because as we both know, like, Islam is based primarily upon the text of the Quran and Hadith. Do you think that texts that support for the calling of jihad, texts that specifically say in the Quran, like Surah 929, fight the unbelievers, behead the unbelievers, Surah 812, and Surah 551, do not even take friends from the Jews and Christians, and Surah 98:6. Surahs are, by the way, are chapters, if I'm losing, but chapter 98:6 of the Quran, which says that the Jews and Christians are worse creatures. Do you think these texts, in fact, shadow that view?
From what I understand, the Quran is supposed to be read metaphorically. It's not supposed to be read literally. It's really written as a form of almost like a metaphor. I don't think that people are supposed to go around killing people and committing this horrible jihad. That actually sounds very un-Islamic to me, from what I would understand. I think that anything which says that you should be killing people or murdering people or slaying Jews or Christians is actually very, very un-Islamic. That's just my personal view, but I would say that generally speaking, anything which tells people to go around killing people or slaying people is very, very un-Islamic.
Do you think there's any sort of early Islamic scholars that support the view you have that we're supposed to read the Quran metaphorically and not what it actually entails, so literalistically?
I imagine so. I've heard as well the Quran is supposed to be actually read in Arabic and that the English translation, because if you read the Quran like a metaphor, it actually does say a lot of positive things about finding God, the path to salvation, not unlike Christianity or the Bible in many ways. And it's quite interesting because it does seem that the Bible and the Quran do have a lot more in common than one would believe, and that they're both really supposed to be metaphors for finding God. But it's a shame that a lot of people have kind of misused these books to just use them to justify the murdering of people and the killing of people, which I think most people at their core really don't support.
So, would you agree though that early text, so any early text, doesn't matter what it is, because as we both know, or as the historians would know, that when we translate text, we translate them based upon the definitive meaning which has been placed on a word. So, for example, the latest translation of Quran, let's say Sahih International, for example, that those words have been translated not only by Muslims, by the way, but by Muslims who have read the text and they've taken that translation and definitively translated it into words. So, would you agree with me then that in order to get an understanding of the Quran, we do sort of need some sort of early scholarship of the Quran? Would you agree with that?
I completely agree, yeah, and I'm sure that a lot of the early scholars as well would probably have a lot of positive things to say regarding these texts and perhaps their later misrepresentation.
So, I understand that. And how much of the early scholars have you read?
Not much. I've only really read the Quran. I have heard as well that a lot of the hadiths as well are where a lot of the misrepresentation comes from, and that the Quran itself is really just supposed to be read as a metaphor, and that the hadiths are where a lot of the kind of maybe more negative aspects of Islam are in, and that people aren't really supposed to follow the hadiths. I have heard some imams say this. Again, I'm not an expert on Islam. I'm just going on.
I'm not expecting you to be. This is what I mean. It's not. I'm not trying to like gauge whether you're a respectable Muslim scholar. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show you. Essentially, when it comes to interpretations or translations of any text, right, there has to be early scholarship on that, and this scholarship has to be translated to English language for English speakers to understand it, but German language for Germans to understand it. The various other Polish language, whatever language, has to be translated in order for the group that it's been received by to understand it. And I would say, in my opinion, but also factually, if you look historically, people like Ibn Kathir, Ibn Taymiyyah, the early Islamic scholars, they did not only state that these texts, the early Islamic texts, support jihad, which is holy war, but they were frantically in agreement with it. And they were in agreement that the kafir, which is basically you, are you a Muslim by any chance?
I would describe myself as a spiritual person. I wouldn't really like to
fair
put any label on myself.
So you, I, and Amy, of course, would be known as Kafir because we don't accept Muhammad emphatically or the last day emphatically, meaning we have not accepted that Muhammad is the only way to truth and that he is the intercessor between Allah and humankind. So we would be Kafir, and Kafir would be worthy of either paying a jizya, which is a tax, according to the early Islamic source, a tax for being a non-Muslim or subject to death or persecution. And that's according to every single early Islamic source.
Well, I've heard that Ahmadiyya Islam is actually the revival of Islam and is supposed to usher in a sort of Islamic revival which stresses love for all and hatred for none. And there's someone I know quite well named Khalid Safir, who's a very, very wonderful proponent of Ahmadiyya Islam. And what he stresses is that there's going to be, well, not him, but effectively what the Ahmadiyya sect of Islam stresses, that there's supposed to be a revival that ushers in a much more peaceful, a much more loving version of Islam, and this is actually the correct way, and this is actually more in line with what the Prophet Muhammad teaches. And I think that this version of Islam is a much, much better, and a version of Islam which doesn't condone the persecution of people, which doesn't condone, jihad, and which is actually a lot more positive and a lot more better for people overall, and a lot more better for Muslims overall, because I think as well, most Muslims would probably much prefer to follow a version of Islam which stresses, love for all, hatred for none, while be consistent with the rather beautiful teachings that are prevalent within the Quran. And I think that would be very good for Christians as well. I think most people on the whole would prefer that version of submission to the will of God over some, much more negative version.
So one question I want to ask is, why then do you think, because Ahmadiyyaism is basically a sect that comes out of the 19th century, it comes out of a person by the name of Ghulam Ahmed, and he claimed to be Jesus Christ the Messiah because the Quran, as we know, states that the Messiah will return, and according to Hadith, the Messiah will return to kill the swine, to break the crosses, stuff like that. Why do you think that the majority Sunnis reject this idea of Ahmadiyyaism? If you're saying it's like the better form of Islam, and in fact every Muslim would want to follow this view of Islam, why does it most Sunnis reject Ghulam Ahmed and Ahmadiyyaism as a whole?
I mean, perhaps the Sunnis are just not following Islam correctly. Perhaps they're actually following what they're following is not really Islamic. I'm just posing a question because it does seem that if they want to follow a version of Islam which seems very, very ungodly and seems like it's going against the will of God, which is to, submit to the will of God, which is to be loving and caring and support brother and sisterlyship. It does seem rather strange why the Sunni sect would want to be following a version of Islam which doesn't really seem to fall in line with that. And perhaps as well, we're yet to quite see Messiah. I mean, what does Messiah mean anyway? It just means anointed one, right? Like someone who's going to usher in some revival or whatever. I don't know. Perhaps we're yet to see this person or people, and I do think that if such people do arise, that they would stress, no, we don't go around murdering or persecuting people. No, what we actually do is we say, look, God is good, we must all love and respect God, and anything which is calling for the persecution of people is ungodly and very, very dangerous.
So bearing in mind, like, you've told me that you've not read the earliest sources on Islam. So that's a fact. We can agree there that you've not read it. And I'm not trying to catch you out, I'm just being honest when I say this. When I say that, it's important to understand Islam from an early perspective. There's a reason why Sunnis are Sunnis. There's a reason why Sunnism and Wahhabism, the sect that comes out of it, is prominent. There's a reason why jihadis read the text they do and come to that idea. And it's not solely because they're just reading the text wrong. Because if that's the case, then the majority of the Islamic world read the text wrong for centuries. Centuries. I would say centuries. But yeah, majority of the Islamic world would have read the text wrong for centuries. So one question I'd ask is, where in the Quran do you find these sort of texts that say, love everybody, do kind things? Do you know these texts at all?
Well, perhaps it's a simple misinterpretation of what the texts were supposed to be, because again, if you look at Ahmadiyya Islam, it's very, very clear, love for all, hatred for none, and it's very clear according to the teachings of Ahmadiyya Islam that this is what the promised Messiah states, love for all, hatred for none, and they don't force conversion onto anybody, they don't call for the persecution of people of other faiths. They actually say that all faiths are welcome and all faiths are celebrated, and that's what's most important, is that we all submit to the loving will of the one true God that we all love, and we don't try and destroy other people's faiths, destroy other people's ancestral lineage, destroy other people's backgrounds. And again, I'm not an Islamic scholar, so I'd rather not comment too much, but I'm sure there are a lot of Islamic scholars out there who would agree with me, who would agree that actually calling for the destruction of other people's faith is wrong and it's actually very ungodly, and that anything which tries to convert people or which tries to spread itself onto people is actually very, very ungodly. And actually, this is not the work of God. This must be the work of something that is very, very ungodly.
So forced conversions is essentially something ungodly. For example, asking people to pay a tax if they don't promote or accept your religion.
I mean, I've heard something like Islam said there was no compulsion. Um, I'm not really sure.
That's fair enough. Well, we can go off the topic of Islam entirely. I want to talk more about Christianity because I'm a Christian. Obviously, Amy's a Christian here, and we do believe in Jesus Christ, of course, and we believe that's the most loving and honest and ethical version of any sort of ideology is Christianity. I mean, you're not a Christian. Explain why first.
I'm just a woman who believes in God.
A woman who believes in God. I like that. So when it comes to God now, how do you think we can understand God as human beings?
I think God is really a term that we use to describe a very all-encompassing divine force. That force is balance, that force is oneness, and all of us, I believe, are born with this ability to connect to this force of balance. And I believe that when we are acting in tune with God, we are actually resonating at a frequency that is pure love, and that God does resonate with us all. We just have to find God and submit to the will of this force of oneness, love, and balance. And that when we do that, we actually restore peace to this realm. And I think that ultimately that is really what's at the core of all of the religions, this belief in oneness, this belief in balance. And that can only really be achieved through following religion correctly, but following a religion which states that we should be loving and just. And I think that this is what all the religions say at their core. Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Sikhism. I think that at their core, they all want to stress that, and I think that that's what the people who follow them want to be. And I don't think that anybody wants to have their religions destroyed, their family destroyed, or have anything bad happen to them. I think that ultimately what we all want is to have peace and to have love, and that is really through the love and connection to the divine.
So what's the importance of love? Because obviously, like, we have a different view, of course, and you would agree, like, of course, that there's a different view of in terms of what religions teach. I mean, as somebody who for the last 3 years has sort of read the text, both in Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, stuff like that, I've just come to the conclusion that the only ethical religion is Christianity. So what do you consider love?
I think love is about duty, it's about fulfilling responsibilities, it's also about action. Like, saying you're a loving person doesn't really mean anything. If you say you love God, it doesn't mean anything. It's about how you act, it's about how you behave, it's about how you treat people, it's about being polite to others, it's about treating others as you would like to be treated. For example, being polite and respectful, greeting people in the morning, being generally trying to act with respect, not forcing your views onto others, and also respecting the fact that we are all different and that we all have different faiths, but that even though we're different, we are all one and we are all part of this collective. And I think that's really what love is. Love is about duty, it's about responsibility, it's about care, it's about compassion, and it's about, most importantly of all, respecting other people and respecting other people's ways of life, preserving other people's traditions and their lineage, and really just allowing people to live their lives in a way that is peaceful, that doesn't disrupt the natural order of things. So people can, live with their families, have their children, pass on their knowledge, and be godly.
So should I, like, for example, let's say in the worst common denominator of people, so let's say the murder, for example, do you believe that a murderer should be respected?
Well, if you commit murder, you're going against the will of God, because we all have a natural...
Which God?
Well, there's only one God.
But which God, in terms of revelation? Because as humans, we can only relate to God through how He's revealed Himself to us. So first, you've told me that you believe God is a frequency, right? But a frequency can't get you revelation, it can't get you laws, it can't get you palpable things to actually choose to do. Anybody can claim that what they're doing is loving. For example, there was an instance where a French teacher went off and ran away with a 12-year-old girl, and they both fell in love. And they both loved each other. And that French teacher, probably thought he was doing the right thing and he was loving that French girl. Now, if we follow your idea of God, He's loving another individual. What is wrong with that? So we've got to establish first what is the revelation of God we're appealing to when we say love, when we're saying goodness. What revelation are you appealing to?
Well, the revelations I gained from the goddess whom I pray to, and this, somebody who worships a goddess. This is where I gain the knowledge that I come to from the goddess that I pray to, from the spirits whom I commune with. And even though I pray to a goddess and commune with spirits, my goddess is not God. My goddess is a goddess. God is a one infinite universal force, and that force is balance, and that force is ever-changing balance, and that is really the highest authority of everything. And you know, I was going to say as well regarding murder, the reason why murder is wrong is because everybody is born onto this realm to live and fulfill a certain life path. And if you commit murder, you're actually playing God. It's like you're trying to interfere with somebody else's life path. Because when we come onto this realm, you know, we're born, we live. We're supposed to go through our lives in a very natural way. And when one commits murder, it's like they're trying to play God. They're trying to interfere. So that's actually a very ungodly act. That's why religions say, you know, you must not commit murder, because if you murder somebody, that's actually going against God's will. You cannot play God. It's almost like, in a strange way, well, that is almost what Satanism really is, isn't it? It's trying to act like God. It's trying to say, I am God, I am God. But it's like, well, no, you're not God. God is above us. You are immortal. And as mortals, you have the duty to act in accordance to the divine, which means not committing murder, treating other people with respect, doing good unto others, respecting other people's faiths, respecting other people's cultures. But that also doesn't mean we respect everything. It's like, accept everything. Like, for example, you mentioned pedophilia, murder. You know, again, these things are ungodly because they are causing harm to others, and that's why every religion stresses that we don't cause harm to others. Like, for example, you know, committing rape, committing murder, theft, these things are all causing harm to others. So anything which is directly causing harm to other people is going against the will of God. Because if God is a frequency of love, that means you don't harm people. You know, that's why there are these certain laws, because we're not supposed to harm people. We're not supposed to harm other people. We're not supposed to infringe our beliefs onto other people through force. We can only speak, like, you know, we're having a conversation. There's two Christians and one just random girl. We're having, you know, these conversations because we're not supposed to infringe upon others. That is what I would consider anyway ungodly.
So if God's just free, because I remember you said essentially the reason why we shouldn't murder is because we're not in tune with the frequency of God.
I didn't actually say God is a frequency. I said God is infinite balance.
God is infinite balance, right? So if God is infinite balance, again, and there is no personality within God, because what I'm trying to discern is how we can know God more. Simply claiming that God is a balance of good and evil forces without understanding what the standard or law that goodness comes from. Without a law, you cannot have without a lawmaker, you cannot have a law. So there still is a problem of you're claiming there is a balance out there that we all must adhere to. We as individuals must adhere to. We must be kind to others. We must do good things. You're appealing to a standard of goodness, but that standard to me sounds subjective to you. Because I could easily say, well, my standard of goodness is that I like to murder. And I think it suits me better and I feel better when I get rid of those enemies I hate. And it actually is better for the environment. For example, if I went out there, let's flip it on its head. Let's say I went out there and killed a paedophile, right? I've actually helped the world. I've not hindered it. If I've killed a paedophile, I've done more for society than most people would. In fact, the jails, for example, they have to feed, clothe these individuals. How much taxpayers' money is going to the jail system? Why don't we just kill these paedophiles, have them be killed, regardless of whether they've been convicted or not, and have it be done away with? That way we're better with society. It doesn't make sense to claim there's a law without a lawgiver. That's what I'm saying. And you're claiming there's a balance that we should all adhere to, but you haven't shown that balance. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, that is where religion comes in. That is where religion, the function of religion really is to bring in the laws in order to keep society functioning. And that's the purpose of religion. You know, religion, because through religion we get, you know, law, we get theology, and we get spirituality. And again, these revelations come to me through my goddess. And this is why, you know, it's important to have structure. And when people follow certain religions and they follow them well and they act in concordance with God, that is where, you know, we enforce, you know, do not murder, do not kill, do not force other people to convert. And I actually think one of the largest problems with the West is that because the West has become a very secular society, it's caused a lot of these disagreements, because when you have secularism, you end up with everything, as you said, subjective morality. And this is the problem with a lot of the Age of Enlightenment ideas like materialism, liberalism, feminism, Marxism, all ideas which I oppose, because they are unfortunately all based on secular morality as opposed to godly morality. And I think that these ideas maybe came because perhaps the church or whomever was pushing the morality was actually using a very godless version of it, a lot like the Sunni Islam sect. Unfortunately, it's true, you know, anything which is saying, you know, let's murder people, that is that is dogmatic. And real religion is not supposed to be dogmatic. Real religion is supposed to be about helping people find God, helping society function, helping society flourish, and bringing people together. That is the function of religion. Religion is not supposed to be a tool for dogma, a tool for murdering people. Religion was created to allow people to truly connect to the divine, to live, in harmonic balance, and to effectively have a good life. And that is why we need religion.
But that, for me, doesn't seem to be the so religion, or the word religio, which basically just means relationship with God. So that's the foundation of any religion. Now, again, you've sort of argued for a kind of just arbitrary view of religion. I would say the problem with that is, again, we have this supposed balance that is God, or the goddess in your view, that's balance. Can balance contradict itself?
Well, the thing about balance is that everything goes together. Like, for example, objectivity goes with subjectivity, masculine goes with feminine, light goes with dark, fear goes with hope. These things all go together, and that's where you get balance. It's when you have these two forces resonating with each other, the idea of yin and yang. These forces go together, and that's where you get balance, and that's where you get God. That's what I believe anyway, is that through that you get balance. But again, I'm talking about my personal beliefs, and my personal beliefs are not enough to maintain society. That's why we need structure, and that's why I think there's actually a lot of beauty in Ahmadiyya Islam, because Ahmadiyyaism is really a very, very good, very studied form of Islam that stresses love for all, hatred for none, and it has a good structure and it has a good idea already, but it's also very, very all-encompassing and welcoming to people of all faiths, because effectively, again, Islam means submitting to the will of God, and with Ahmadiyyaism, you have that structure, you have that, sense of religion, but with structure and with goodness. I remember I went to an Ahmadiyya convention earlier this year, and I didn't see anything negative there really, and I think that we do have to be practical and say, look, what is actually going to fight a lot of this woke, a lot of this trans ideology, and actually preserve the other people's faiths. And Islam is something which is really rising in the West, and it's like, well, again, if we look at Islam as really just about believing in God, what kind, which do we pick? Do we want to pick one which is, do you want to pick a force which is destructive, or a force which is preservative? Do we want destruction, or do we want preservation?
Well, I would agree
and
with
I think
some
we
of
should
that,
have preservation.
Because I would say, look, with any form of Islam, it doesn't matter what form of Islam it is, essentially it has to be based on the holy text, the revelation of God. Any Muslim will tell you themselves that they base their teachings, whether it comes from Hadith or the Quran, solely on what the Quran says. The Quran, according to the Sunni tradition of Islam, is literally the word of God. And then second to that, of course, is the Hadith tradition, which is the word of Muhammad. But the Quran actually states, if you read it, that Muhammad's sayings, or anything he says, is the word of God. And he's the best example. Yeah. And I was going to get to that, in fact, because here's the thing, and obviously you've said you disagree with the Sunni tradition, but the issue is the Sunni tradition is way older than the Ahmadiyya tradition. They would claim orthodoxy above the Ahmadiyyas. Now, I understand the Ahmadiyyas may have a claim, and you may have entered into their mosque, that they're loving and good, but I'm not arguing for a tradition or religion that argues for loving and good, because you can be loving and good and be a Satanist. If you literally read people like Aleister Crowley's writings and stuff like that, they were against harming people. They just wanted to practice their witchcraft in peace, and they enjoyed that, and they believed, look, it's do as thou wilt, as long as you're not harming anybody. Again, the difference though is, with Christianity, the Christian ethic applies to all standards of life, not just that standard. It's not that we just be good and loving, but we be good and loving knowing that within ourselves there's nothing good. Now, within Islam and other religions, they don't teach this. They don't teach that pride comes before the fall, because innate pride is what causes other sins. For example, if I'm prideful, if I think I'm worthy more than another person, then what's stopping me from raping another person? Why should I value that other person? If you just say to me, oh, because God said so, that's not an argument to do those things. That's not a good argument because God said so. No, the reason why you shouldn't do that is because ultimately, one, your body was not made for that. You were made in the image of God. So the image of the divine, you were made in that image. You're made to not only emulate that image, but that person you're going to attack, to berate, to rape, that person is essentially your very image. So what you do to yourself, you do to others. That's why Jesus says, like, Um, um, words.
Love others as you love
Yes,
yourself.
love others as you love yourself. Thank you.
Would you say there's a lot of similarity in the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Ahmadiyya Islam? And again, as mentioned earlier, Ahmadiyya Islam is Islamic revival. It's about ushering in a revival of Islam, as in a reformed version of Islam that is positive and loving and not all that dissimilar to the teachings of Jesus Christ, which you might find
The problem is Islam essentially relies upon the fact that Muhammad, according to their story, Ahmadiyyas would agree as well, that Muhammad received revelations from Allah in a cave and then successive revelations after that point. So we'd have to first establish what is historical. Because with Ahmadiyya Islam, that comes thousands of years, or at least a good hundreds of years after Muhammad. You see, the difference with Sunni Islam is that it's at least orthodox books enough to say, look, we have hadith traditions stemming to 200 years after Muhammad. And that's Sahih Bukhari.
So it wouldn't Ahmadiyya, the man, be a false Jesus on your way?
Oh yeah, well, we know that. I mean,
But does she know that? I'm just saying, explain, because that's why it's erroneous.
I mean, that's another reason why it's erroneous, is because this man is claiming to be the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Again, the Jesus Christ of the Bible and the Jesus Christ of the Quran. Which both Sunni tradition and is the Quran itself doesn't state that a person named Ahmed Gulen would return. And most Sunnis would tell you this. In fact, I think most Orthodox Muslims of the Shia tradition, most of them would actually state this. Ahmadiyism is a very small sect of Islam that comes out of the 19th century. So here's the problem we have with this is that, well, I mean, I'm all for reform. I believe that Muslims should reform. I do believe they should.
I think that's a very ultimately what most people want, a reformation in order to bring about, a positive change for the future so that we don't continue down this long night and down this long war. I think most people universally want to have a good future for their families and for their children. And actually the idea of reformation for a new positive, golden age, if you will, of loving God and prioritizing a love of God above else with structure and with discipline, I actually think that can be achieved positively if people submit to the will of God, and if people also live with hope in their hearts and with doing good acts and treating others well. But we do as well have to be very realistic and look at ideologies like perhaps the Sunni sect or the woke ideology, the trans ideology, and say, look, what are these actually doing? Are they actually following godly acts? What are they actually teaching? And anything which teaches people to murder people, to commit rape, to commit pedophilia, to me this is not the work of God, this is the work of, I would say, Satan. And even though Satan is a very, very strange concept, I don't even believe that Satan is really a thing. I think Satan is almost like a construct that was almost created by humans, because if you think of God as being ultimate balance, that is a balance between good and evil. Satan almost seems like this being that has been almost manufactured. And realistically speaking, I almost see the devil as our ego. And when you learn to tame your ego, and you're only ever one with God, and you only ever fear God, there is no reason to fear Satan, and there's certainly no reason to serve Satan or do anything satanic.
Well, that's interesting, because I honestly think when it comes to the divine, there is goodness only with the divine. There's no mixture, so he's not a balance. The reason why I don't believe he's a balance, because I believe human beings, when we do evil stuff, we are perverting the good. Sex is a good thing.
When I say balance, what I mean is that we only get good when we balance out our good and our bad side, because nobody's purely good. We all have, you could say, a bit of evil or bad inside of us. The only way in which we achieve balance is by resolving that badness within us, and by almost, the idea of taming your inner monster, taming your inner demon. That is the only way you get balance. It's not by, if you just try and be perfect all the time, that is not how you achieve goodness, and that is not how you achieve union with God. You have to balance and have that resolution, and that is how you effectively get rid of Satan.
And I believe the Christian ethic answers this when Christ tells us to do unto others as we have done to ourselves, that we're in the image of God, and essentially there is no one good. When we place not only a God, but an object that is far greater than ourselves, far more good than ourselves as well, above ourselves. It's not, balance in essence of a good and evil cannot be done, because evil remains evil. I remember you were earlier saying once we meld light with a dark, it's basically balanced, but you can't equal light with dark. Dark is separate from light. No matter how much times you try to put it together, the light will either consume the dark or the dark will consume the light. That will just happen. These are opposites. Male and female. Whilst we obviously can connect on a personal, and the Bible, by the way, says essentially that there's no Jew, no Greek, no male or female, for all are one in Christ. So that it's very clear that we are all one, essentially, in our being and essence. But in the way we deal with ourselves, obviously, as you know, as somebody who follows Andrew Tate, I think you will follow Andrew Tate. Am I lying?
Yeah.
Okay. So you would know that males have a greater position in society. We have to. We have to, in some aspects of society, we have to do the work. We have to stick our oar in when we need to. And the feminist idea that we should be equalized and everything doesn't work, because we're not biologically the same. Like, I can't give birth to a child. That's just a fact.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been fighting feminism a lot, and what I've been advocating for is a new women's movement, because I think that when you get rid of feminism, you have to replace it with something better. Because here's the thing, if we get rid of feminism, my fear is that we will have a lot of men behaving very badly, and we will have a lot of men abusing their power, because, as you said, yes, men are greater physically than women, and men who don't follow the will of God will unfortunately start to take advantage of their privileges, and that's where we end up with, this idea of this oppressive patriarchy. I don't think this is how men naturally behave, by the way. I think that men are actually supposed to be good in the same way women are supposed to be good. This is why I believe we need a strong men's movement and a strong women's movement to complement each other, to cancel out this idea of, gynocracy in the West, or, maybe men being genuinely abusive to women in other parts of the world. You're absolutely right. Men and women are not equal. We are different. And what I advocate for is the preservation of gender roles. God created male and female, masculine and feminine, to be different, to be complementary. And what I really advocate for is complementary, being complementary. That's something which I strongly advocate for.
I would agree with that, actually. That sounds very positive.
Most people agree.
I mean, I would say this, though. Like, I believe in equality of value, not equality of position. I would say the reason why there's patriarchy is not because women are less valued than men, but it's because of how women are wired.
Patriarchy is actually a Marxist concept. The feminist conception of patriarchy is a massive distortion of gender roles, and it turned gender roles into men as being the oppressor and women as being the oppressed, but that's not how it's supposed to be. Patriarchy, also feminism and patriarchy, is a Western conception. It's a very atheistic conception. It really has no relation to other religions.
So what I mean by patriarchy, or any sort of patrial role, is essentially just God as being father, God as being author, essentially, and the man being head of the wife, basically. But it's not that we don't have equal value. For example, the Bible says, contrary to a lot of Muslim die at the park, essentially that there is a role for wives in the union. But essentially, if I was to abuse my wife, she has grounds to divorce me. According to 1 Corinthians 6, that means I've abandoned her, because I've abandoned my duty over her. The Bible says I'm to treat my wife as I treat my own body. If I beat myself up or scar myself, I'm not treating myself good. I've abandoned myself. And therefore, I've abandoned my wife. Therefore, the wife has the right to leave me. Other things, of course, are adultery as well. That's an important thing within the Bible. And that's why it's important to have, what's the term? Well, it's important to have a male-female sort of relationship where it's one partner rather than multiple partners. That's what I believe. But, yeah, monogamy, that's what I meant.
Well, I completely agree, and I think as well, I believe they do say that in Amadeism as well, that you should have, a man and a woman, that you shouldn't have men having multiple wives, because actually that turns women into chattel. This is also why I'm against prostitution. I think that, yes, God made man and woman to be together and to, effectively come together in a, divine romantic union and to have children. A man is a father, a woman is a mother, and this is what our roles are. That does not mean that women are inferior to men. That does not mean women are not equal to men. And as well, for the record, that does not mean a woman can't have a career. I've never, ever, ever once said...
No, I wouldn't say that either.
No, well, I feel like I need to say this because a lot of people misinterpret. I know feminists can be very dangerous. I want to make it very clear. I'm not against women having careers. I'm not against women wanting to vote or wanting to drive. But as well, as long as you retain that a woman is different from a man, that is really what is very important.
I agree with that. I would say one thing about Ahmadiyyaism, because again, we can presuppose, look, Islam can be reformed, but essentially the texts themselves cannot. And for example, you mentioned like Ahmadiyyaism supports this sort of view where men have equal roles of view and rape is wrong and stuff like that. But I'd argue that the Quran has a different view. Now, we could argue whether translation of the Quran are valid, that's fine. But really, if you're an English-speaking person who has no access to the Arabic, you're going to be following the English tradition. And if we're talking about a people who believe that God inspired these texts. So this is God that infallibly inspired these texts to the point where it's been translated to many different languages, and God knew this. This is what they believe. God knew this. Then we have to come to the conclusion that what we're receiving today is either inspired by God or it's not. That's what I would say. And I would say, essentially, the Quran says, for example, in chapter 4, verse 34, it says to beat your wife. Now, these are one of the many commands you're to do if your wife disobeys you. It says in chapter 2, or Surah Al-Baqarah, which is from the Quran, by the way, 2 verse 223, I think it is, off the top of my brain. But yeah, 223, it says, your wife is a tilth, so go into her whenever you want. Now, a tilth is basically a field, so plow her whenever you want to. Now, marital rape is clearly instituted there. There's no denial of it. You're telling me it's to be read sort of analogously or metaphorically. But I would say, if I am an English speaker reading this, what other conclusion am I to come to? I would have to come to the conclusion that either this text is not good, or that I must listen to other men who came after the Sunni tradition, thousands of years after the earliest manuscripts of the Quran we have. I have to listen to these men, and they will tell me from the 19th century that, oh, well, it's essentially not the case and it's all metaphorical. I believe that's a very fairy tale way of looking at things. But I do believe the Bible, which we have, the gospel clearly tells us that Jesus died, Jesus rose again for our sins, and that Jesus loved his disciples so much that he was willing to become a human, the very God of this world, become a human, but not only do that, but to do something submissive as to wash his disciples' feet. Right, Jesus says, come to me, all you are weary, and I will give you rest. In Jesus there is rest, and he treats none of his disciples any different. He had female disciples, use the wrong terms, but he had female disciples who would pay for his board, pay for him to live places, and he was happy with them, he rejoiced with them, he loved his mother, and he respected women. Ruth, for example, in the Old Testament, was given a whole book. For herself, Deborah was made a judge of Israel in the Old Testament as well. And in the New Testament, we see there's deaconesses in the Bible as well. Women are given a role in the church that's great, and they're afforded value that's equal to men. I would say the Bible, in terms of Ahmadiyyaism, I would say the Bible is more consistent, because if you read the commentaries over the last 1,000 years, St. Justin Martyr, St. Augustine, if you read their commentaries, you can come to the conclusion that, yeah, this is teaching equal value between male and female. Whereas you've read the commentaries in the Quran, before there was an Ahmadiyyaism, you would read that, no, men are above women in every single way. You are to be enslaved. In fact, the Quran says you can take sex slaves. It's in chapter 4, verse 24. Now, I mean, what do I, as an English speaker, do with this? I can say, well, you know what, I don't really understand the Arabic, so you know what, I'm just going to leave it. Or I investigate further. But if I do that, and I read the Arabic, and I still come to the same conclusion, remember, the Arabic was translated by Muslims. I mean, why would they sabotage themselves? But be that as it may, if I read that and I come to the conclusion that, yeah, this does emphatically teach that women are less than men in value, then what other conclusion do I have other than to not accept Islam, but to accept the risen Lord Jesus Christ? What other excuse do I have?
Perhaps the Quran was not supposed to be read in English, and it was supposed to be Arabic, and perhaps the people who translated it in Arabic deliberately mistranslated some things in order to corrupt the original text. Perhaps. Please do not take my word for this. I'm using the word perhaps.
Can I say one thing? Sorry, because I've been researching in many Middle Eastern countries, they don't even have laws about domestic violence. You know, because it's not an issue. Like, I'm not saying that all Muslim men will beat their wife. There are some that are very loving. You know, we're talking about the ideology, but there are no rules. Like, there is honor killing. You can kill your daughter, your wife, if, let's say, they do something in Islamic. This is very common because they're following Islam.
Honor killings and domestic violence is not godly, and I would even stress that this is actually, if Islam means loving and submitting to the will of God,
It doesn't mean that it means submission. According to every early scholar. Yeah. Go on.
murdering and beating one's spouse or committing domestic violence is going against the will of God.
But even if you get raped as a... Anyway, we have to go, but even if you get raped as a... according to the Hadith, you will need 4 witnesses, and this is why. And they have to be male because the testimony of a woman is worth half. So this is why women have to cover up in Muslim countries, and they have to be, accompanied by a man. Because if something happens, they're going to be guilty.
Let me make this very clear. I'm not a religious follower. I'm not a religious leader. This is all based on my interpretation. But in safe, cohesive, homogenous, God-loving societies, Women should not have to be afraid of their husbands. When men are actually following the correct divine law of God, men are supposed to behave in a way that is appropriate and loving and caring, and that includes not beating your spouse, not committing domestic violence, not raping your women, and not fornicating with children.
Well, I would say the Bible has those ethics. Jesus Christ says anybody who harms the little ones would be better if he was dragged into the sea with a millstone, which is a large stone, by his neck and dragged into the sea, basically. That's what he says.
I think Jesus said that, and I think the Ahmadiyya revival also said that, and ultimately it seems that these religions are
Which verse in the Quran says that?
Well, I'm saying that Ahmadiyya Islam stresses love for all, hatred for none.
No, that's fine, but the thing is, with Ahmadiyya, as I showed you, Ahmadiyya Islam relies on the Islamic text. So that's why I'm asking you. They can say what they want. Again, if you're talking about historically, I would say historically, Jesus Christ comes well before the Ahmadiyya revival. That's fine, but I would say this: if they come before and they're copying a moral paradigm that exists before it, then not only that they're plagiarizers. But why would you trust the validity of Ahmadiyya Islam over the validity of Jesus, who's saying far greater things than what the Quran's saying, far better ethical things than what the Quran's saying?
Perhaps they are both valid.
There can only be one truth. That's a fact. If I tell you,
they are both coming to the same conclusion.
But if I tell you 1 + 1 = 2, my sister in humanity, if I tell you 1 + 1 = 2, there cannot be any other interpretation. There can't be any other version. There's objectivity, reality. Reality screams objectivity. And the fact is there can only be one valid truth. And while she may see the principles in Ahmadiyyaism as a good thing, I would say Christianity predates that and has far greater principles. So I would say this: look, if you can, I'm not forcing you to do it. You have all the time in the world to do it. But I should just pick up a local copy of the gospel, wherever it's on your phone, if you want to give it, and just have a read of it.
Both Christianity and Islam seem to stress a revival.
When you say Islam, do you mean Ahmadiyyaism?
Both Christianity and Ahmadiyyaism both seem to stress a positive reformation to the will of God, and both of them seem to stress the same thing and come to the same conclusion and come to the same truth.
How much have you read? And I'm sorry for interrupting, but how much have you read of the Bible?
That's not relevant to this question, sir.
I know it's not relevant, but I'm asking you a question just to qualify something. How much have you read of it at all, of any of the Gospels?
I've read some of it, yeah.
Okay, so what part strikes out to you at all?
I prefer not to answer that question.
Fair enough. Well, I would say, look, have a good old go at reading it if you
one. I
want to.
can give it to
Yeah.
I don't need the Bible, thank you.
That's fine. But we honestly we appreciate talking to you, and I suggest think over these things. And honestly, like if you've got the time, study early Islam. Like I would think that's really important. If we want to say
Please as
Ahmadiyyaism,
well, can we say I'm not a religious scholar and I'm not
I didn't say you were.
No, for the camera, I'm not a religious scholar, I'm not a religious leader.
Fair enough.
I cannot be held responsible for any form of religion. This is all just personal views based on interpretation. Thank you.
No, I mean,
We gotta go.
Yeah, I was just gonna say briefly, just kind of we obviously were not intending to speak to you, but we came here today and we saw you, and I thought I'll ask. And I did see on YouTube that you had a few conversations with Smile to John and you support Andrew Tate. And for me, although you're not a Muslim, I think that's concerning because, you know, these two men, they're satanic. They're like sheep. They're wolves in sheep clothing. And we wanted to just discuss with you, but obviously you can think otherwise. You know, people who advocate for pedophilia, they do. Okay. Well, if they follow Muhammad, who's a pedophile, they do follow accept pedophilia, because in many Muslim countries they follow that, and they would do it in here. Like Smile to Jannah, he thinks that Aisha was an adult. If you know when he. Yeah, thank you. And this is a person we're talking about. It's your choice, but it was nice.
It was good speaking to you anyway, man. Take care. We got to go. Nice speaking to you.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you for.
I had a conversation with an individual by the name of Rational Female. Now, I enjoyed her company. I thought she was very nice to talk to, but I think she had a lot of contradictory points, and I want to mention one of them. One of them was her view of ethics. Now, she claims that once we meld light, dark, bad, good together, essentially we can have a balance. But the problem with balance is it assumes that good and evil exist on the same level, and they don't. That's just not the case. Evil is a perversion of the goodness. This is what the great church father Athanasius Alexandria said. That essentially evil is a perversion of good. Everything you do that's evil is perverting the goodness. For example, if you indulge in sex with your wife, that's a good. But if you do that outside of marriage, that's a bad. Or you do that in a situation where you're raping somebody without their own free will consent, that is bad. So there are instances where sex can be a good thing and a bad thing. I'm just using that as an example. So essentially, when we say that good and bad, what do we mean? And what I was trying to convey to her was essentially this, that without a revelation of God, you can't come to the conclusion what good or bad is. She started off the conversation by saying that God is a personal force, or is a force. And I argued that essentially that you can't get personal things from impersonal things. And essentially that moral goodness has to come from a lawgiver. That's just a fact. She then tried to argue for the Islamic worldview. The problem is she's never really studied Islam, unfortunately, because according to Sunni Islam, especially when you read the sources of Ibn Kathir, Ibn Taymiyyah and stuff like that, war was clearly outlined. And the Kafir were to be persecuted. That's just a fact. Surah 929, read the commentaries on that. Surah 812, read the commentaries on that. Read the Tafsir, for example, where Muhammad says himself that he came to purge the Arabian Peninsula. And he literally states himself that he was sent to fight those who do not believe in Allah or the last day. So there's clearly fighting words. There's no denial about that. She then decided to reject Sunni Islam on camera, which she says she doesn't. She says she's not a scholar, but you openly rejected Sunni Islam. And then accepted the views of the Ahmadiyyas. The problem with the Ahmadiyyas, of course, is that Ahmed Ghulam, or Ghulam Ahmed, essentially was he was a wild madcap individual who believed he was the returning Messiah of Jesus. Well, he believed he was Jesus or the second coming, and he believed that essentially through him there is salvation. But the problem is the Ahmadiyyas only have texts dating from beyond the 19th century. They don't have texts before that. So they can't appeal to the Hadith or the Tafsir, because the Tafsir and Hadith contradict their position, because the Hadith Tafsir nowhere state that Ghulam Ahmed will be this new coming prophet or the Messiah will return as Ghulam Ahmed. That's just the truth. Ahmadiyya is defunct as an ideology, and whilst they may believe in good things, so do Satanists, so do our friends in the Hindu tradition, so do many of our friends in the Sikh tradition. That doesn't mean just because they believe in good things that they have a good moral structure. The Christian ethics obviously has a good moral structure because it's based primarily on the character and revelation of God, which is Jesus Christ, according to John 1:18, who is the only begotten Son of God. I would say this as a question to the individual, rational female. Yeah, I'll say as a question to rational female. Why is it that you support people like Zishan, who on his own YouTube post claimed that Aisha was an adult, even though he's a Sunni, by the way, and he has to believe that Aisha fornicated with Muhammad at the age of 9. And why would you follow a man like this, accept a man, have conversation with a man like this when he's openly for the Sunni tradition, which you berated, just because he has a wife and a child, so what? Again, we're talking about ideology and not a person. The person can be as kind as they want to be. And our Muslim friends can obviously live good lives and be moral. We're not arguing for that. But if the presupposition of your religion is immoral, then essentially, and you're not questioning it, then you're not following after righteousness. I would say the only way to righteousness is through the King of Righteousness. And I hope that the rational female is watching this, because I'll say this, the ethics you espouse for male and female having equal value, obviously male and female having equal roles, is found all throughout the Bible. There's no Jew, Greek, male or female, for all the one in Christ. And you are to treat your wife as you treat your own body, and the wife is to do the same, essentially. There is equality in value, but there's difference in roles. The relationship we have with the church as Christian men is supposed to be that of leadership, because we were given the moral principles, not only that, but the biology to deal with this sort of hard and arduous work. This is the reason why we're bigger. This is the reason why we're stronger. We are supposed to emulate that of God, who is bigger, who is stronger. There's a reason why a woman cannot have these roles. One, because they're more emotionally led. They can be more sensitive. And whilst women can be great logicians, they can be great authors, they can be great literaturists, they can be great scientists, the difference is, of course, is that they are supposed to be teachers, whereas men are supposed to be leaders, because men are supposed to emulate the very image of God in which they were made. Remember, man was created first, then women after, from his side. That doesn't mean women are less than men, because from the side of Adam came Eve, from the very heart of Adam. So you've got to understand there is equality in our value in our relationships with God, but there is not equality in our roles in society. And I would say the primary ethics that she's looking for, that you're looking for, rational female, is found only within Christ. I would say Christ is a God that sticks closer to a friend. Closer sticks to you as a friend does to his brother, basically. If I'm getting that right, if I'm not, then apologies. But he's a friend that sticks closer to you than a brother, and he's always been there for us, and he died for us, and he entered human flesh. And you've got to understand the wonderful thing about Jesus Christ is that amongst all other pagan and historical gods and gods thereafter, he's the only God recorded to have washed his disciples' feet, to have taken on the lowest state in humanity, to not have returned as a great masculine form as the epics of Homer tell us, or as Allah is depicted in the Quran, but he comes to his lowest position and becomes a man living in poverty, living on the streets, in fact, living off donations, in fact, and washing his own disciples' feet, emulating that which we are supposed to do for other individuals. He's showing us that this way of living is the greatest moral ethic. And so far, no religion, from what I've read, has even gone close to emulating that kind of humility and pridelessness. Because every other ethical moral standard tells you that you're the good, you can achieve the good. But if you know what goodness is, and this is what I challenged you actually through world, if you knew what goodness is, you would know that there's nothing good inside you. That every time you have an instinctual inclination to want to be angry at somebody, or to shout at somebody you think has wronged you, or to attack somebody you think you disagree with, whether it be verbally, or for example, even the inclination to want to assault somebody violently who has maybe wronged one of your family members. Every time you have this instinct, you are emulating that of evil. Because again, goodness does not harm. Right? What does the Bible say? Right? Love is patient, love is kind, love is long-suffering. And that's what Christ ultimately was. Christ was long-suffering, Christ was patient, Christ was loving. And it's only through Christ can we truly see what goodness is. But as we look at ourselves, as Paul says, in a glass darkly, all we see are just figures of demons. You know why? Because demons lust other things in this world. And I'm sure the rational female, you do as well. We don't need a great political system. We don't need some great moral structure or law that will keep us in line because we can't because we can't know these things ourselves. We know intrinsically what good is. The problem is we can't emulate it because we have the desire to do bad continuously. But only Christ can do that, and it's only through love of Christ, making him our perfect example, that we can truly understand what God is.